This is the good news according to St. Mark, the 6th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. And now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. And as Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and moored the boat. And when they got out of the boat, people at once recognized Jesus and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever Jesus went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. The gospel of the Christ. Praise to you, O Christ. Please have a seat. May God's grace and peace be with you all this day, this Sabbath day. In the gospel that we just heard, and as Ingrid shared as well, the disciples have been sent out by Jesus on their missions, but they've been followed by crowds so large that they haven't even had time to rest or even eat, we're told. And that's when Jesus invites them to come away to a deserted place, a lonely place is sometimes the translation. And you know what this suggests, of course, is that the disciples, but even Jesus, needed, a time away, needed a place of quiet and rest as a, place to regroup, a time to be refreshed and renewed. And the fact that Jesus is the one to perceive these needs in his disciples, I think, is significant as well. Those are words then spoken to us, I think, as well. We know from some other gospel accounts that Jesus was known to go off early in the morning alone to what is described as a lonely place to be alone and to pray to the God he called Abba, Father. He did it, as part of his own spiritual practice, his own spiritual discipline, we might say. And if Jesus needed to do it, that suggests it's important for all of us as well. There's a text that's usually used to begin the season of Lent from Matthew's Gospel. I think it's chapter 6, where Jesus is teaching his disciples about prayer and his way of spirituality. He tells them not to practice their piety in public, but instead to go into their rooms and close the door, sort of shut the outside world off for a bit, and to pray to God in secret, is the way he says it. And the implication, of course, is that, one place to find God, to experience God, to communicate with God is alone, in prayer, in a quiet place. And this in turn suggests the importance, the centrality of one of the teachings of Jesus' own Jewish tradition, the Sabbath, which is so central to Judaism. In fact, Rabbi Abraham Heschel says that the Sabbaths are the Jewish people's great cathedrals. Cathedrals not in a place, but in time set aside to be with God. And of course, the Sabbath is based on Well, the story of creation, God resting on the seventh day, so that if God, even God, needed to rest from his work, well, that it's important for us. And again, in the understanding of Abraham Heschel, he talks about it's only when we step away from all our human-oriented projects and plans for using the stuff of creation that we will understand God's will for us and all of creation. That is, in the appreciation of the mystery and wonder and beauty of things. For human beings so completely oriented to imposing our will on creation and working to conform its processes to our needs, it's only when we step aside for a bit that we learn to trust in the Creator rather than in our thinking we have control of creation. The idea is that when we practice this kind of Sabbath rest, we then begin to see the world as God sees it. To return to today's gospel, despite their need for some time off, well, as you heard, the crowds beat Jesus and the disciples to where they're going, and well, despite their weariness and need for rest, when Jesus sees the multitude, they look like sheep without a shepherd. And instead of being irritated or angry at the interruption of their plans, he has compassion. Compassion, of course, means literally to suffer with. And this suggests maybe, well, that compassion really finds its source in prayer, alone with God. Again, as we see the world and those around us as God sees them, time alone with God gives rest and renewal that strengthens faith and nurtures compassion. There's a story from the early Christian church. It was after the establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, and there was a renewal movement that took place even that early in the 3rd and 4th centuries, known as the Desert Fathers and Mothers. They were men and women who went out into the deserts of northern Africa as hermits in order to reestablish what they felt was a lost contemplative character of Christian spirituality, lost in that new imperial church. And these Abbas and Ammas, fathers and mothers, as they were known, spent their days alone in silence and prayer and simplicity in this harsh setting. But even in this austere practice that they followed in the lonely place in which they lived, there was also an alternative perspective about the fundamentals of the Christian way, of Christian spirituality. It's reflected in one of the stories told in Thomas Merton's book, The Wisdom of the Desert, where they tell many little vignettes about these Abbas and Ammas. And in this case, it's a story about Abba Moses. He was invited to join a council of the elders in order to judge one of their brothers who was erring, was not going the right way. But as he made his way to this council, he carried a big jug full of sand on his shoulder that had a little hole in the bottom. And as he walked, the sand leaked out behind him. And when the other brothers saw him approaching with that sand pouring out behind, they asked him, "What are you doing? Why are you carrying this jug?" And Brother Moses responded, "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them. But today I'm coming to judge the errors of another." On hearing this story, or in hearing this, so the story goes, the assembled brothers forgave the erring monk. As Jesus' actions show, both in seeking time alone in a quiet place with God, but also in reaching out to those in need, well, he's teaching us in both of these ways, despite the importance of seeking out a lonely place to be alone with God. As he looked out on that crowd and saw them as sheep without a shepherd, well, what these two together remind us is that beyond the truth that time alone with God is needed to nourish compassion and faith, the suffering of people in need always takes priority in our Christian way. And that means, well, there are two sure places to meet God. One is to be alone with God in prayer, and the other is to meet God in meeting the needs of those around us. Amen.